I couldn't think of anything clever for the intro joke. So, you get this. Anyway, as you might have read from the title, this video is about some unspoken rules when it comes to telling a story. And being a game master is kinda like telling an interactive story, so of course these also apply there. Now, there's a lot of these rules, way more than I can name off the top of my head, so I'm going to focus on the most popular ones known as the rule of cool, the rule of drama, and the rule of funny. So, without further ado, let's start our little dive in. Let's be real for a second. As humans, we have evolved to be the dominant species of the planet because of our brains. We have come up with rules we can rely on to better understand the world around us and how it works. But when Tony Hawk defies the laws of physics and hits a 900 on a half pipe at 48 years old, we're not thinking, why is he still doing it? He's old. Our monkey brain is going because of how cool that was. You probably heard this line before. How do you want to do this? The famous question that comes up when a player takes out the big bad after a fierce battle. This is a moment where the game master takes a step back to let the player's creativity fly, and let them describe how they achieve this feat, how this grand victory goes down. Even if what is described shouldn't be possible according to the rulebook, but it's a player's interpretation of a cool finishing move, so we allow it. Similarly, the game master can just as easily use this momentary suspension of how the game's rules work for the advancement of the plot, or to introduce an important element to the story. We don't question how something happens if it's cool, we just accept that it happened and move on without asking too many questions. However, like everything good in life, overusing it can quickly wear out its shine. The example of a final boss execution at the hands of a player works because it's the climax of a struggle. It's not something that's going to be happening every session unless you're running a dungeon crawl, but I digress. Imagine if during every random encounter with a bunch of nameless mooks, every time a player puts one down, the pace of combat slows down because you're putting everyone on a stand to tell you how they do it. And there's only so many ways you can say, I hit it with my sword and it dies, before you start repeating yourself. And the opposite is just as bad. The absence of a cool factor undermines the player's achievements when the only feedback they get is, you kill it, here's the loot. It makes the game monotonous and uninteresting. Encounters start feeling repetitive, characters and directions get lost in memory, and before you know it, nobody can remember any key elements like names, locations, or even their current quest because everyone at the table is falling asleep or looking at their phone. Like table salt, the rule of cool has to be used in moderation. Too little, too none, and the game feels bland and joyless. Too much, and you get a Dragon Ball Z fight where both sides are pulling power ups like they're on the playground, and you might as well use the rulebook as a blunt weapon rather than a guide by that point. We all love some drama in our stories. Some mystery here to keep us guessing, some suspense there to keep us at the edge of our seat, maybe even some romantic tension between characters to make us wonder will they or won't they, and of course the twist that catches us by surprise and makes us become more deeply invested into the story. Remember that the player's characters are part of a world which is bigger than whatever town they happen to be in, and that world keeps going regardless of the player's presence, most of the time without their knowledge. Maybe one of their family members, which they relied upon, has become a fugitive of the law. Maybe their loved one has been captured by the big bad to hold them as ransom against the heroes. Or maybe a previous enemy escaped death because the characters didn't give him a good old double tap. These are only some examples of how you can spice up your game by giving the player's characters new motivations to go out and interact with the world, maybe after they've accomplished their initial goals or to give them additional ones. But there's only so much rule of drama you can apply before every twist starts to lose its edge. If you're going to keep bringing back old enemies that keep surviving whatever the players throw at them, it starts becoming less of a returning nemesis and more like the bad guy punching in for the day to be a nuisance before clocking out and going home until the next day when it's more inconvenience to the player characters. And with no drama, you run the risk of the players losing interest in interacting with the world. After all, what's the point in overthrowing an evil monarch if there's not gonna be any changes that the players can look forward to? Is it realistic that things will change overnight? Of course not. But we're not playing play pretend games and following rules from a textbook because we want a realistic simulation of historical or modern politics. Most of the people in this hobby are in this hobby to momentarily escape the later. If the rule of cool is table salt, then the rule of drama is spice. Adding a bit here and there can make a game more interesting than it will be otherwise, but adding too much will make it tedious and hard to get through. Nothing gets more grating than putting in the time and work towards achieving a goal only to end up at square one on the next day. And without it, well, sometimes it feels like maybe that's just the end of the story. If there's not gonna be any changes, or if there's not gonna be any sequel hooks, cliffhangers, or stingers. Though sometimes that might be for the best. Who doesn't appreciate some good old comedy? Sometimes a punchline is set up and delivered, or sometimes it is purely incidental. But whatever the case, having a proper laugh at it can make any situation memorable and unique regardless of how mundane it might have been. Personally, I'm probably going to more clearly remember any game session where someone or something got a proper laugh out of me than one where I supposedly gave out critical information regarding the plot if there was no reaction to it. There's a lot of ways to do comedy: physical comedy, coincidences, irony, holistics. Hell, sometimes even not doing anything can be funny. I have more than once presented a trap chest to the party only for them to realize there was nothing to worry about and they just spent the last 20 minutes arguing whether they should risk the hit points for some loot, which was probably just as underwhelming as the supposed trap. Of course, humor is subjective, and what one person may find amusing, another may find droll or even offensive. Like the other rules that come before it, the rule of funny has its time and place to be applied, and it may work better in some games than in others. If you want to run a game that is super serious and grim, then by all means keep the pee pee poo poo humor at bay. Do keep in mind that even if the game table allows everyone to be a little silly, that's not an excuse to turn someone into the butt of every joke. Sure, maybe they have more bad rolls than everyone else at the table, or maybe they said something sussy one time, but remember that everyone should be comfortable at the game table. Just because it's fun to take a jab at our friends every so often shouldn't be the gateway to bullying them. That's how you get someone to start resenting you and making excuses not to show up to the sessions anymore. By the time you realize something's up, you're no longer friends on Facebook or Discord or TikTok or whatever people use to make friends these days. There should always be some clarity that those jokes carry no ill intent, but it's hard not to think otherwise when you seem to be the target of every one of them. If coolness is salt and drama is spice, then the rule of funny is sugar. It's not necessarily required to enjoy certain meals, but it can make others much more palatable in the right amount. But too much of it will overshadow every other aspect of the campaign and give you cavities. As a game master, you're free to experiment how much of these elements you want to include into your games. Find what amount of each works well with your groups. And there's nothing wrong with asking for some feedback at the end of each session. That way you can improve upon your formula to reach a balance everyone can enjoy. It's kinda like baking a pie from scratch. If it doesn't come out right the way you want the first time, you can try again until you get it right. But if experimenting is something that you're still afraid to try, that's what Domino's is for.